Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leanne Rigney. I am the coordinator for disability outreach here at UNC Charlotte's Career Center. This is our second session in a series of 5 sessions on disability at work, specifically focusing on neurodiversity in the workplace. So last week we started off on looking at what is neurodiversity. Today we get to hear from David Barlaam from Honeywell. He's going to be talking about job searching. Next week we'll get to do a panel on interviewing as neurodiverse, and then we'll get to hear from some folks at JP Morgan and Chase about neuroinclusion. So thinking about what type of resources you have within the workplace. And then we'll close with some introductions on digital accessibility. So really kind of focusing on all different stages of that job, going from the job search all the way until once you have a job. Just a few housekeeping things. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, and we'll get that sent out next week with a link so you can share it with your network, or if folks aren't able to come today. I am going to ask that you guys introduce yourselves in the chat. You can put your name, if you're a student or faculty or staff member or an employer joining us, and where you're joining us from, just so we can get an idea of the audience that we have here today. And as we're going through today's session, if you have any questions that come up, feel free to place them in the chat. I'll be kind of watching that as David gives us the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to David to take it away for our session.
Thanks, Leanne. All right, let's try to share the screen and see if this works. All right, can you all see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, good. It worked. Yeah. Okay, I can go home now. I'm successful and this is done. Now, so first off, thanks everybody for joining. Super excited about being here. This is neurodiversity is really important to me. I have ADHD and prosopagnosia, among other things, but prosopagnosia is face blindness. So I don't recognize people by their faces for the vast majority of situations, which makes it a really interesting fact that I became a recruiter as my career, because we're all about recognizing people and meeting people and learning new people. So kind of a little bit of irony there, I guess. But yeah, so I've been recruiting for a very long time. I lead a good portion of Honeywell's leadership recruiting. So basically everything manager through senior director here at Honeywell. Also on the All Abilities Steering Committee. All Abilities is our employee network focused on people with disabilities. And on the steering committee, I lead the talent acquisition function or vertical. And then, I'm just super passionate about trying to really enable Honeywell to be a more inclusive employer. But even more so, a lot of what we're doing with our All Abilities network is becoming a true business resource where we're even impacting so many of the products that we make and really trying to get into making sure that everything that we do as a company is focused not only on, who was always kind of traditionally thought of as the customer, but a very inclusive version of that customer. So that's that. Let's see. Okay, so that's me. As I said, I've been recruiting since 1995. I grew up in New York and New Jersey. I've lived in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Texas, Ohio, Florida, and now in New York City. Graduated from the University of Houston. So if any of you like basketball, you'll know that it's a pretty exciting time. And just a few months ago, I was married for 20 years. So that's pretty good. We lived in, until the last 2.5 years, we were in Miami for about 6.5. And we were big Disney files. My jobs over my career have taken me all over the world. I've been to, I think, 35 countries and I think 42 states. And we love Disney. I have 2 daughters, and it was a lot of fun. So just kind of a couple of ground rules or expectations or understanding or whatever. I'm only representing me. I don't know every neurodiverse person. I don't know every type of neural condition or experience or especially as we've recently here learned a lot about intersectionality. I think everybody's experience is different. So just putting it out there, I'm only here able to speak for myself and kind of walk you through some of my experiences, both from the job seeker's point of view, as well as from the recruiter's point of view and hiring manager's point of view. Everyone is different. Experiences vary. What works really well for one person at one job may not work as well for others with other jobs. So just kind of throwing that out there, sharing what has worked and what hasn't worked for me. I can also obviously speak to what I've seen at the companies I've been a part of or applied to. But again, it's all from personal experience, not that I know for a fact that this company or that company is good or bad or whatever. Always challenge yourself and try really hard to push. Like some of the things that we'll be talking about, I'm sure are uncomfortable to some of you or a lot of you. Challenge yourself to do things that you haven't or normally wouldn't or whatever, but don't leave yourself behind just to land a job. I guess if you really needed the job, then maybe you could, but I've definitely found that the more I've had a mask to land something, the less happy I was during that time of my life. So that's just kind of a overall platitude. Know yourself, your habits, figure out how to best harness them to your advantage, I'd say. So as I said, I have ADHD. In recruiting, we constantly have to, quote unquote, multitask. I know the various opinions on multitasking include that it's not possible or that it is, but not really. The fact is that in recruiting, you have to flick from thing to thing to thing to thing. With ADHD, you can do that pretty well. Other times demand kind of hyper focus. Again, kind of right up our alley. And it's been really interesting. Of my team, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of them have self-disclosed as neurodiverse. So it's been really interesting that by being so public, maybe as a part of it, or by being functionally aligned to something that is really kind of in our wheelhouse, it's worked really well. So, just something that I thought was interesting. All right. I think the first part of job searching. Oh, you know what? One other housekeeping thing. If you guys want to ask questions or, have questions, I can't see the chat, it looks like, but, someone else can manage it. And if you guys want to ask them, that's great. I guess, Leanne, if you wanted to, I'm all good if you guys want to ask along the way or not. So whatever you guys, I can see the chat. Okay. So yeah. So if you guys want to just let me know when something in the chat pops up that you want me to answer or whatever. So just we can figure that out. But anyway, really kind of important to prepare to prepare yourself first. If you don't know what you want or you don't know what you're looking for, make sure that make sure you figure some of that out first, because the absolute worst time to realize that you have no idea what reason you're there for or why you are looking at this job as your next potential step is during that interview. So, and we've all had those moments. I mean, I certainly have when, well, why do you want to work here? And you're thinking, well, I'm not sure that I do. That's a great question. But if you ask yourself, what do you want to do? Not even necessarily the job. Like, what do you enjoy doing? What aspects of life do you like? What are your short-term goals? What are your longer-term goals? I think that often helps. It's almost, I guess it's almost like playing your own guidance counselor a little bit. Or I guess you all have student services and can utilize them as well. That's probably a really great resource for you. But really digging in and understanding, okay, here are some of the things that I'm really good at. Here are some of the things that I enjoy. I am ultra gregarious. I love talking to people. I happen to have had a career where the vast majority of my life has been, I get to meet new people and then they tell me their story for a living. So that's pretty freaking awesome. Like, all right, I meet you. What do you do? What do you want to do? How do you do it? Did you learn something? Just all these stories about how they became who they became. So for me, it's super fun. If I was a massive introvert or, just had different preferences, I might think this is the worst job in the world. So again, I think really being introspective and figuring out, what do I enjoy doing? What do I want to do? What are my goals? What are my aspirations? Kind of, is this going to work towards getting me there? I do think that self-introspection is really important. Another important thing to think of is career ROI. So return on investment can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. I think it's a combination of, well, money, they're paying you something, right? Experience, investment in you, development, impact that you're having in other people's lives in the community, whatever that means to you. Make sure that what you're investing into the company that you're going to or the job that you're going into really pays you in the currency that you value, and that you're continuously challenged and growing through that. Thinking through what jobs, I think especially I've heard this from a lot of fellow neurodiverse people. They think that they need to have 10 out of 10 of the requirements or desired skills or whatever to apply for a job. That is absolutely 100% not true. Now, I mean, should you? Maybe, kind of on some level. But the reality is that extremely few people will meet all requirements. Now, I wouldn't apply to a medical doctor role because I'm not a medical doctor. So I'm not saying go that route, or I can't apply to a lawyer job. And I mean, I don't have a JD, so that would be problematic. But, if you're reading through something and they want, 8 things or 10 things or 11 things, and you have 5 or 6 of them and you know them pretty well, apply to the job. I mean, so many times as we're interviewing people and as we're talking to people, we're like, oh my God, I fell in love with this candidate. They're amazing. They're light. Let me see what else we have across the organization that might be right for them. It's almost never, oh my God, like why in the world would they possibly apply? They only had 4 of the 10 things and they just waste it. I mean, we don't, that's not how we operate. So please don't think you need to meet all the qualifications to be in play. If it's close, apply anyway. All right. It's not. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about resumes. Resumes are difficult. Resumes are super challenging. They never, or they rarely feel like a real accurate representation of us. There's actually an organization here that I've worked with a tiny bit since meeting them, and they actually work with neurodiverse people, and they produce kind of a profile that really highlights everything that a person is, rather than just the stark things that you see on paper. So I'll find out later if I can share who that is. And I think that they may have worked with y'all before, but I think that it's important to realize that a resume is not a list of everything you've ever done. A resume is not, oh, well, I had this job for 2 months, so I need to include it, because not including it would be dishonest. Like, don't say you were somewhere else during that time, but you don't need to necessarily include every little thing that you've done over the course of all your entire career. It really should be something that's tailored directly to the jobs that you're going for. So think of it as a marketing document describing, and this part's really important, describing to the hiring manager what problems of theirs you're going to take away. So like most of us tend to think in the role that we are in today, or, in the role of college student, or in the role of someone that wants to transition careers. So I need to just talk about the things that I exclusively have done today. There's a lot of cases where you can actually put together things that you've done and highlight how that makes you a great candidate for something else. So I think that think a little bit differently than just your purely work-based experience or whatever. Even be it a school project, be it a certain class that you love, be it any one of those things. Push hard to make sure that you are representing yourself almost as an advertisement would talk about you, rather than just a boring resume. Be descriptive but concise. So again, ADHD. Before coming to Honeywell, I had a resume that I had gone to an extremely small font and packed in an enormous amount of information into 2 pages. And it was an extreme struggle to do it. And every time I went to shorten it out, I was stuck with, well, but I mean, that was so important and it did so much for the company, or it did this, or I'm so proud of this aspect. If people aren't going to read your resume, they're not going to care what's in it because they never read it. So if you go down to I may have been down to 8-point font in aspects of it. It's not ever going to do you good because people aren't going to read it. So I started over. I threw it out and pulled up a template from Microsoft Office, and it was a substitute teacher template. I remember that pretty clearly. And I just used it and started writing from the perspective of, what would my boss need to know that I'm going to be able to solve for them or take care of for them or do for them that makes me worth hiring? So I think that being descriptive, speaking clearly and directly and concisely about what you're aiming for and what you can do, and then stopping is really important. You might feel like you should describe everything in full detail. Don't. Think of it as, this is going to sound really bad, but think of it as clickbait. Like, you want someone looking at it and be like, oh my God, I really do want to know why they did that or how they did that, or something like that. You also might feel like, oh, it's just a resume, I can just throw it together in just a few minutes. Don't do it. Probably most importantly in that area, have your friends, have your coworkers, have anybody that you can get to read it, read it. You are so close to the things that you've done, and you are so intimately involved with everything that you're listing there, you're going to overlook some typos, some misspellings, something. Other people that are reading it for you don't have that same investment or involvement, so they're going to spot things that you won't. Please, please, please have them read it. It is incredibly important. All right. So what to look for? So number one, look for jobs that match what you'd like to do. If you're someone that, like me, doesn't necessarily have the longest attention span, going into financial audit probably would not have been the smartest choice for me. And even today, I'm really glad that I didn't, because I know what they do, and I don't think I could do that for a living. And yes, sometimes ADHD presents as hyper-focused, but you often don't choose when that happens, so it'd be really hard to do. Really reflect on kind of what your skills are and what your personality is, and who you are as a person, and try to make sure that you align what you want to do with things that you do well, or things that you'd like to do well, or things that you want to invest in yourself in. To make sure that there's so many people that you can reach out to. Look for people in like we have All Abilities, which is our employee network. Reach out to some of us. Like I've never met a person in one of these groups, be it here or elsewhere, that would not share how they were successful in adapting to their role or whatever, especially with somebody that's kind of just entering the workforce. I think we'd all be thrilled to. Look for signs that the company welcomes neurodiversity. Yes, there are times that you can kind of tell it's astroturf, and you just put, that on your website, but you don't really care, or it's not important. Look for people on LinkedIn talking about activities that they went to, or things that they're involved in, or companies share a lot, and companies are pretty public in a lot of the stuff that they do. I not competitive directly in terms of what we do as a company, but certainly competitive for talent. An organization invited us to see what they're doing in the neurodiverse space, and we were astounded by so much of what they do and how they do it. So they're going to share some of their best practices with us. So I think that you'll be able to see pretty quickly when you start exploring. Are there outward signs that this company does understand even what neurodiversity is? If you don't see examples of that, it doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't potentially go there. However, if they're clearly welcoming, I think it does send a different message. Yeah. Okay. Early on, I mentioned dealing with some things that might not be in everybody's comfort zone. You know what? I just saw some questions. All right, so see a question. What kind of things could you ask to someone who you'd like to learn more from about a position or a company, or just demonstrate interest without being demanding? So Ali, thanks for asking. I would say first and foremost, do some homework. I think that is really important. It can be frustrating when someone reaches out and they're like, oh, so what does your company do? And what do you do there? That's not great. So at least knowing, oh, I know this, and this, that. Like Honeywell has 100,000 people. We are in 3 megatrends, automation for buildings, energy efficiency, and aeronautics. So there's certain aspects that I think I just skipped that up, but there's certain big aspects that you really do need to know, and that are front and center. But I think that if you're reaching out to someone, telling them that you admire their career and what they've done, I would always look to find someone with some similarities in terms of maybe the same school, maybe same major, maybe the career that you want to get into. There's a lot of different areas that might be the right connection to them. But then, if you see an indication that they're public, that they're neurodiverse, certainly ask them about what's it like, being neurodivergent at a company or doing the job that you're doing. A lot of people will be very open and share. If you reach out on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, here's what I do, I'm looking to get into this, I love what you've done from a career perspective. Is there any chance you might be willing to spend 15, 20 minutes with me? Most people, I think, will say yes. And if you do that a number of times, I think you'll definitely find people to say yes. I think ask what's interesting to you and then what you really want to know. But certainly, what is it like transitioning from college to professional? What did you struggle with being neurodivergent? And if they're comfortable, they'll answer. If they're not, they won't. It's fine. So hopefully that answered that question. Leanne, was there any other question? I don't see any of that.
I have not seen any other questions.
Okay, cool. All right, so networking and connections. So as I said, just now, reaching out to people is not in everybody's wheelhouse, and I'm a recruiter, and even given what I do, you would think I can reach out to anybody. I can, but sometimes I don't want to. It can be intimidating, no matter how long you've been doing this. And I think that some people can just call anybody and talk to anybody, and it's perfectly fine. Other people it's harder for, but especially when it's about you and your future, I think it's especially hard and can be especially challenging, because you're very much invested in a product that you're quote unquote selling. But bottom line is that when you reach out and form relationships with people, it really does change so much of the dynamic. There's people that are doing what you're hoping to do, but are further in career. There are people that are maybe not in the same exact area, but are neurodiverse and are having a lot of success. Recruiters, we pretty much always want to talk to everybody. and we're always happy to network and get to know more people. I see that even in the chat, there were some recruiters networking and, you know, happy to jump out and meet people. And then hiring managers, if even in cases where you're not yet qualified for a role that they might have, or you're too early career, or any one of the other things, they usually like investing in people, and I think most really high quality hiring managers enjoy investing in people. So they'll take the time to get to know you a little bit. They'll probably let you know pretty quickly, hey, you know, this is definitely quite a bit senior than you are, but that's a great time to ask if you can keep in touch and, you know, keep them updated as your career continues to grow, and maybe reach out to them for advice every now and then. Again, for the most part, people are very welcoming of that. I think people really do like to invest in others. This is probably a fairly challenging component, or you know, if to disclose your disability or not to disclose your disability. It's 100% a personal choice. I do. I mean, obviously, you're talking about mine pretty publicly, so. But I do disclose on my applications, and I've never had a negative ramification from that. I know from being internal that we don't see that ever. We don't, as recruiters, HR teams don't see it. Asking for an accommodation is a completely separate thing. Now, I have on occasion had times when I had self-identified and the company reached out to me and asked me if I needed an accommodation for the interview. But I mean, just by the fact that they did that shows me that it's not being used as a discriminatory factor. They're actually looking to help me. So I was enamored with that. You know, I would say it should be very safe. It is protected information. No one should ever be discriminated against because of that. But I also understand that, you know, people really do have concerns about disclosing. So again, personal choice. But I have not seen anything negative come of it. So I would recommend doing it. All right, let's make this go again. All right, how to actually apply. Apply on the websites as you can. Something that is important, a lot of times other companies scrape, like Honeywell's job portal. So they'll just post our job, and the real idea is that they're just trying to get your information to market things to you, and then they pass you over to our site. So read the URL, try to make sure that it matches the company that you're applying to. Otherwise, it might not be something as good. Be very thoughtful in how you apply. You would not believe the amount of cover letters and intro paragraphs or whatever that I've read where it said, hey, I'm really excited about working for company X, but I was at company Y. They just used a letter that they had been sending out with all their applications, maybe. Fill in the details that are asked for, but you don't need to fill out everything, just everything that's required. So if you're uncomfortable with certain aspects, just don't fill it out. Try to connect with a person if you can. The hiring manager, a recruiter, HR. You can even reach out to the executive, you know, one of the executives there. Again, it's about making a human connection versus just being another application. And then this sometimes can be really difficult and discouraging and challenging even, but keep track of your applications. which company did you apply to? What resume did you use? When did you apply? What job at that company? It's pretty bad when we hear back from hiring managers that the candidate didn't even know what job they were talking to the manager about when we had spent a half hour talking to them about that job. And keeping track of it all, making sure that, like, so many people have told me, oh, I applied to a ton of jobs, I don't know which one this is. So I think you just want to be really careful there and make sure that you're presenting yourself and all that in the best possible light. Again, it's make sure that you are really using the process. If something is if you can't put your full attention into the process and complete the application to the best of your ability, maybe come back and do it later. I think I hit assessments in just a bit, but just be aware that there are companies that do have assessments. We are certainly a big user of assessments. Make sure that you are able to dedicate the amount of time that you need to do it successfully. A lot of them are extremely hard and very important. And a lot of them do offer accommodations if you need them. So we'll get to that part in just a bit. And then on the keeping track, be detailed. Keep track of who you talk to, because a lot of times the person that you talk to won't be there. But if you can call back and say, hey, you know what? I was talking to Bob, but then I haven't heard from Bob in a while. Oh, well, Bob got promoted into this other area. I'm now taking their stuff. But the fact that you clearly had a conversation with Bob and know him may help you get a little bit further in the process. So once you apply, you might have to wait a while. That's okay. We have jobs that were literally crushed with hundreds and hundreds of applicants. I have a job that was just out there that had over 1,000 applicants. And there are some that have many thousands. We have really strong leadership development or rotational programs here. The amount of resumes that we get for those is absolutely mind-boggling. So just because you're not called doesn't mean that you weren't the right one or that you were rejected. They just may not have gotten to your application, or may not have found you before they were starting to put together an offer, which sometimes can take quite a while. Don't take it personally. Like, that's incredibly important. No news is just no news. There's a lot of jobs that you're not going to get out there. Please don't despair about it. Don't think that you're never going to get a job. Don't read too much into anything, positive or negative. Like, I got an interview. It doesn't mean you got the job, but it's very nice positive. Make sure you do all your homework, that you prepare, that you go in as well-informed as you can, and that you really see kind of what the environment is. And again, if it is one of the companies that's very welcoming of neurodiversity, learn about their program, learn about what they do, learn about how they do it. They may even be willing to let you speak with a member of that organization and have you really understand kind of what the environment's like before you join. Be cautious of oversharing while at the same time be yourself. I can honestly say that I struggle with this too a lot. You don't want to just fully disclose everything about you and all your faults and issues and things you need to do better. So that can really overwhelm people. So be careful on that. But at the same time, be yourself. Like, don't hide and don't not really be comfortable in being you. Again, like I said before, if you are very covered up or masking who you really are, eventually you're going to be miserable at that job. Because if you can't be yourself at work, and we all work a lot of hours and a lot of time, you're really going to struggle. And it's grating. It's so much more stressful to not only have the regular stress of a work environment and the job and the goals and deadlines and all that, but also having to hide who you are. It's so extra taxing. So, just be really cautious on that. Make yourself available when they ask you to be for interviews. A lot of times we'll reach out, we'll want to schedule something. If you're very much a morning person, you can say, oh, is something else available in the morning? Or if you're an evening person, like the same. But in general, if you're not going to meet with them when they want, they're also lining up other candidates in the background. So make sure that when you get the shot, you're ready. And then, as I said before, we talked about this. If there's an assessment, you likely will be able to ask for accommodations. In our process here at Honeywell, there's an email that you'll see. I believe it's in the email that we send out requesting you do it, as well as on the assessment page. You can just send an email to that. The recruiters, the HR, hiring people, we never learn that someone requested an accommodation. It's fine. Please take advantage of what's there for you. So please do utilize those. Most organizations have the ability to ask for an accommodation like that. All right. Dealing with feedback. Not all feedback is valuable. So there are some people out there that are just wrong. We find this especially with people who are on the spectrum being told that they need to have a firmer handshake or that they need to make more eye contact. I mean, yes, those have been aspects of the corporate world that have been valued, but I think more and more people, certainly, and organizations are realizing that there's not real value in that. I mean, I guess unless you were a professional handshaker, maybe then handshaking would be important, but no one cares. I mean, maybe there are professional handshakers and they care, but eye contact. I mean, if you're brilliant at what you do, who cares? I mean, that's not where it matters. We are working internally, and other companies are as well, at educating more and more people about neuro differences and helping them understand not everybody thinks, acts, interacts the same way that you do. It doesn't mean that they're not incredibly well qualified at all these other things. A lot of times, even bad feedback or low quality feedback, sometimes there's a little nugget of goodness that can really be helpful for you. So sift through it. If you have a mentor, and I highly recommend working with a mentor, working with, as I said before, guidance counselors or, professors that you really hit it off with, other resources that the school may have, professionals that you interact with. I mean, whoever it might be, run a lot of it by them. Say, hey, here's what they said to me. Is that something I should value? Is that can you see that as well? And let them also be kind of a censor for you in the sense of, okay, I mean, maybe I can see why they would say that, but no, I wouldn't worry about that. You continue being you, or maybe there's something you can learn a little bit that you can adjust some. I've gotten rejected many, many times in my career. It's fine. It's perfectly okay. And some of which I knew exactly why, others I never learned why. But it's okay. I mean, don't let not being picked for something stop you. You know, it's tough. It may disappoint you. Sometimes it's a job that you really had your sights set on. Learn from it. Value the effort and that you put in for it and you tried, but don't be overly negatively impacted. I mean, it's fine to be sad. Everybody's, sad when you don't get something that you really wanted, but it's okay. I mean, every big professional that I know that's in a leadership role or has really done a lot with their career, has taken chances and been exposed, and sometimes were not found as well as they would have liked, and have learned from it and grown from it, and that's fine. Something that's incredibly frustrating. Sometimes literally you click the apply button and then you get the email 0.2 seconds later. After careful consideration, we regret to inform you that while you were very well qualified, there were simply other people that were better suited for this role. I'm like, really? 0.2 seconds later, you didn't really carefully consider anything. Don't worry about it. It's okay. It's a filter that some reason knocked you out. Move on. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply to other jobs at that company, though. There's just some automation that they're looking for something. I had it in one case where the very last question on this massively long application was, do you have an MBA? And I saw it. I'm like, that's the knockout question. And they left it till the very end, and I wasn't happy. And I clicked no, hit enter, and immediately got the rejection notice. If you receive some feedback that really just has you questioning, is this even right for me? Am I meant to do this? Stay positive. Everyone goes through it. Everyone has doubts. Everyone is at some point going to struggle and be challenged and really try to make sense of what sometimes just isn't logical. They had 2,000 candidates and you just weren't the one chosen. So, I would say as much as possible, stay positive. I mean, it's impossible to always be positive probably, but make sure as much as you can, just keep on pushing, keep on driving, and don't, each no is just another no down on the way to the yes that you'll eventually get. So don't worry too much about it. And then the last one, don't bring up negative feedback from others on your own. I was interviewing someone the other day and they're like, so I know that all my experience is in this, and that's probably a problem. I hadn't thought about that at all. Not even crossed my mind until they said that. And I'm like, And it wasn't a problem. And I let them know, hey, some people are going to think, oh my God, that is a problem. And you were the one who put it there. So, it's fine to bring up things that you might struggle with or whatever, but if someone, don't go in and say, well, my last few interviews, they've told me I talk too much, or that this or that or the other thing. Don't it's not going to help you. So be careful on that. A lot of people are self-effacing to put others at ease. Interviews and job hunts are not the place to do that. So, just be cautious on that. That's it. I mean, I'm happy to open up for some questions, but I'll secure my my LinkedIn and my email address. I would love to connect with each of you. But happy to answer any questions you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was so great and had so many good points. You're welcome. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll make sure we get them, or you can come off mute and ask them yourself. And I'll kind of just leave it open for a minute and see if anyone would like to ask any questions. I see a comment in here. It says, this was great. I'm an accessibility counselor at Gaston College and sent this to students on my caseload. I have some of them were able to attend. Really great insights and recommendations.
That's great. Yeah, Sean, it's funny, I forgot to add that. I was thinking about that. Practice interview. If you really want an incredibly high cringe factor, but it's a really valuable tool, record yourself answering some practice interview questions, and you can even have Gen AI write out typical interview questions, then record yourself answering them and listen to it. Everybody hates their own voice being recorded. I forget the psychological reason, but there is one. You're going to hate how you sound and you're going to hate your answer, but you can learn so much from it and you'll be able to kind of help answer better when you really get that, rather than the very first time you answer something be on an interview for a job that you really, really want. But Sean, really great point. Thanks for making it.
Thanks, David. This is Sean. I really appreciate all that you've shared today. It's been super helpful. And so I just learned through my own experiences and through the experience of trying to hire talent is that the more comfortable you get with the interview process, with the twists and the turns, the more confidence you have, the better that you're going to do in the interview.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. Good deal. So Amy, great question. And nice to meet you. Yeah, it is a struggle. And again, I think everybody views it differently. I do on occasion tend to refer to my stuff as superpowers because again, for recruiting and for what I do, it literally could not be better. There's just so much that being quote unquote bouncy is how I always think of it, or being able to, snap from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next easily is really powerful. I know that some people do have some sensitivity around the superpowers. And again, I just represent me, not anybody else. We do have some programs that are going on here. We have an internship that is neurodiversity focused that we're doing in one area right now. We're looking to expand it into probably 4 or 5 more areas across the company. We are in the process of meeting with some more formal educators about really developing a thorough end-to-end educational process to hiring managers, to HR, to even coworkers about how valuable neurodiverse people are, how to best work with them, some of the differences that they might experience, some things that are more of a struggle for them, some things that they might not like, and just kind of keeping that education and that conversation going. We're in the very early phases of that. Something that I learned recently, Honeywell's employee networks are only 3 years old. And the amount that the networks have accomplished is absolutely stunning, especially when you consider they're still so new here. I joined, it's coming close to 3 years now, but I had no idea that they were just not long before then formed. So I think that there's A lot of really amazing work that's been going on, and we're ramping up more and more. Some of the members of All Abilities are actually here in the presentation, and I would highly recommend that wherever you might go to work or whatever jobs you get involved. If there's not something there already, try to form it. It's really in the community that you can build, that you're going to find so much support and people educating each other and really helping them understand, okay, certain groups might not be best at this. However, look at this. Look at how stunningly amazing they are here. And there was one recent statistic that I saw that one of the programs had 97% retention over 3 years. And that's absolutely unheard of. So, it really is something that people and companies are starting to invest in.
That's awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure. Jordan, I don't know the answer to that. If there anybody that knows that, maybe there's a need for it. I'm sure there's a need for it, but
Yeah, Jordan, that is a great question. And we will definitely look into it at the Career Center. I know that our National Association is starting to do a lot more, present webinars, etc. So I can see that this would probably be something that they're potentially working on, and we will check into that and can circle back. Great question.
I mean, I'm not even sure that there are any good non-neurodivergent careers that, like, what should I be when I grow up? I don't think there's any really well-established way to test for that. So I don't know. Jordan, maybe you have a future business that you'll start and become incredibly wealthy with.
There you go.
I will say that we do at our Career Center have a career assessment that you can take called Pathway U as a student. It's not specific to neurodivergent individuals, but it is open, and it kind of allows you to see different options based on values, workplace preferences, interest, and personal goals. So that might be something to consider.
That's great. Yeah, and thank Mariana's one of our All Abilities chapter leaders, and she's amazing. And yeah, I mean, just reach out, and we're so happy to connect with people, and that's the parts of our job that are fun, and we get excited about and all that. So please don't be shy, and never hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I do want to be mindful of everyone's time, but this was amazing. And thank you so much for sharing your insight with us. And for everyone attending, it was a great session.
Thanks so much, everybody.